Well, good evening, everyone. We appreciate you joining us this evening for our parent webinar. My name is Adam Swinyard, and I'm the superintendent for Spokane Public Schools. And we look forward to providing an update on our reopening for school in the fall and provide an opportunity for you to ask questions of our panelists. So we are going to begin by doing some brief introductions. So we'll start with Heather Bybee, who is our Director of Curriculum for the district, and she'll also be supporting us as a moderator in the question and answer portion of this evening. We have Becky Dowdy. She is our Director for Health Services and oversees our nursing program and our safety protocols related to student health procedures. Becky Ramsey is our Director of Special Education. Oscar Harris, he is our Director for Family and Community Engagement for the district. Phil Wright, who is the Director for Facilities. Alex Evans, who you see on the screen, is part of our communication team. And the individual that helps keep us all coordinated and on the same page, our Executive Assistant, Rochelle Miller. So we're going to begin this evening by providing an overview of how we are moving forward in the planning. And as everyone recognizes, this is a challenging time for everyone in our community. And we know that this pandemic has been most impactful to the most vulnerable individuals in our community and has had a significant impact on all of our kids. Shifting in the spring out of our school buildings to a full distance learning environment was a challenging transition for our staff, our students, and our families. And as we move into the uncertain future that is ahead of us, we have been working hard to plan for a variety of different models to support our students and to support their learning moving forward into the 2020-21 school year. So we're going to begin by sharing with you, this spring, we started a task force across our district to begin evaluating all the different factors associated with reopening school in the fall. And the aim of that group was to provide guidance and recommendations for a safe reopening and finalize a plan to really outline how we're going to comply with the guidance that has been set forth by the state superintendent of public instruction for our district. As we move forward, we are thinking about two potential models that we have to work through. One is a plan for reopening our school buildings. So when we are able to open our buildings and deem that it is safe and appropriate to do so, we know that we need an elementary model for students, a secondary model, and then we're also developing a full distance learning option so that we know that even when our school buildings open, that we may still have families that are uncomfortable sending their students into our schools until there's been more progress in fighting the COVID pandemic. So that has been one of the key focuses of our planning over the spring and summer months, is developing those plans for reopening our school buildings when we hear from state and local officials that it's safe to do so. It's important to point out that there's lots of conversations related to that topic right now as our health officials are evaluating the current situation and evaluating when it's going to be appropriate and safe for us to reopen those buildings. We're also planning for the potential closure of our school buildings. So if it's deemed that it's not safe to open our buildings, we know that we need a really good plan in place for a distance learning model similar to what we had in the spring, but we know that we need to make significant improvements to that experience for our students and staff. So part of the planning is outlining what that will look like in the event our school buildings are closed. So we're looking at two potential pathways. One is our buildings are open and we can go into our schools. We know we need a plan for that. And the other is our school buildings are closed and we need a different model for our students. Our task force has been covering a number of different topics as they go through that process, reporting to a steering committee that has included individuals both inside of our district, our teachers, principals, central office staff, but also individuals outside of our district, such as Dr. Lutz from the Health District has been participating on the Leadership Steering Committee. The group is split into subcommittees to really focus in and bring content experts to the table around safety and operations, elementary education, secondary education, special education, English language development services, a full distance learning option, what does that look like, intervention services, technology support and access, and athletics and activities. As we move through this as a multi-step process, the first being to launch the task force and utilize the subcommittees to provide recommendations to the steering committee. The steering committee has worked to finalize those options, and that information is being used as we partner with Spokane Education Association to develop a memorandum of understanding that will guide how we open our schools and how we partner with our employees. And then that will lead up to our school board of directors approving a plan that must be submitted to OSPI at the state level that will outline both the plan for if our school buildings are open, as well as the plan for if our school buildings have to be closed and we have to use a distance learning approach. This work is being guided by the requirements set forth by OSPI for reopening schools. Some of the key aspects of that, and it's available on their website if you're interested in going and reading through the guidelines for yourself. Some of the key pieces of that is a 6-foot spacing requirement in classrooms in the cafeteria. And when that 6-foot spacing is referenced, it's not 6 feet between individual desks, it's 6 feet from the individual student's head. And so that's how we've modeled and planned for that. Face masks must be worn by students, staff, and any volunteers coming into our building. Face shields are allowable for certain situations and staff when they're providing instruction. As you can imagine, we have a variety of different teaching and learning aspects. It's really important for students to see their teacher's face, not only for just that social, emotional, and relationship connection. Students really key into nonverbal communication, but it's also really practical and important from a teaching perspective in scenarios such as teaching phonemic awareness and teaching students to pronunciate words. It's important that kids can see their teacher's face and their mouth. So face shield will be allowed in some scenarios. Really stringent protocols for hand washing. A screening plan for taking temperatures is required, and we've also received guidance on transportation of students. I want to share a little bit about where our planning is in the current moment for elementary and secondary. So our goal at elementary is to maximize opportunities for in-person instruction based on the current safety guidelines. Some of the factors that we are considering is that one of the things that we have learned over the spring is it's challenging for our younger grades to engage and participate in distance learning and use those digital tools. And we know that the most significant and profound teaching and learning experience is that face-to-face in-person instruction. And so we've really looked at ways that we can develop models that meet the guidelines set forth by OSPI and really tries to maximize how much in-person instruction we can have for students at elementary when we get the, when it's deemed appropriate that our school buildings can open. Some of those key considerations, again, is that 6-foot distancing between desks and tables. We're modeling approximately 20 students per class. That's the number that we have identified as what can structurally, from the size of our buildings and the size of our classrooms, that's how that number allows us to meet that 6-foot distancing requirement. We're exploring possibly alternating day schedules for older grades, really with the strategy of trying to limit the total number of students on campus at any one time and create more space in those classrooms. Students likely eating breakfast and lunch in classrooms is another consideration. Regular outdoor breaks. One of the things that we know as we move forward is we're going to have to think really differently about what education looks like in our classrooms. And because there won't be as many opportunities in elementary to come sit at the carpet together and participate in those types of activities, we know it's really important to get kids up and moving on a regular basis. And so we're looking at things, for example, such as having kids go outside and move potentially up to every hour. Going outside, moving, doing activities outside, having playtime outside. We know that's good for learning, and we also know it's going to be really important with the setup of our classrooms. And then again, we're looking at that full distance learning option for students whose families aren't comfortable returning to our school buildings when they open. At the secondary level, our goal has been focused on, again, recognizing the value and the importance of in-person instruction, but also evaluating distance learning. Our older students, again, we value and prioritize in-person instruction, but given the circumstances, we know that distance learning for those older students has a role to play. Currently, we're looking at alternating schedule with students attending school 2 or 3 days a week in person and providing online activities when they're not at school. Again, really thinking about limiting the total number of students on campus. And as we have modeled things out, for example, Lewis and Clark High School, that's a large school. There's approximately 1,800 students that attend. So developing protocols for how students can enter the building safely and exit the building safely with that number of students, transitioning from classroom to classroom. As we've modeled that out, our middle and high schools are so large that doing that safely and meeting the guidelines would be very, very logistically challenging to do safely if all students were present at all time. And that's why we're looking at that alternating schedule. Students, again, need to be 6 feet apart. Breakfast and lunch service is something that we're currently studying and modeling out how to do that safely. After-school activities provided when allowed. We still are waiting for guidance on extracurricular activities and athletics, but we'll be looking to ensure that if students are on an alternating schedule and there are after-school activities, we'll be developing strategies to make sure that students that don't have transportation can still participate in those. And then again, looking at that full distance learning option. Now, Becky Ramsey is going to speak just for a moment on some of the considerations for special education services. We're also going to touch briefly on athletics. And as we provide these webinars throughout the summer, we'll be touching kind of the overall big picture, but also addressing some individual topics such as special ed and athletics.
Thank you. So our overarching goal in special education is going to be to provide a continuum of special education services that meet the individual needs of students and families. We know we have some families who are ready to come back for in-person instruction, and we're ready to meet the needs of students in that setting, but we're also looking at ways that we can still support IEP goals through distance learning for those families who are not as comfortable with coming back into our school buildings. And we're going to some considerations: prioritize in-person services when it is safe to do so. Provide distance learning services to families who choose to enroll in the SPS distance learning option. And I just want to make sure families know that's for all students with disabilities, whether you're in a specialized program or a resource room student or a speech-only student, we're able to provide remote services. And then the big one is just partnering with families at the beginning of the year to determine what services are needed to address the impact of COVID, both on the students' academics and social emotional well-being. We know there are some students who are going to need additional services after what was lost, the time that was lost at the spring, during the spring. So really sitting down and talking with each family and what kinds of services and supports does your student need as we go into this school year.
Becky. And then briefly, athletics and activities. So we're currently studying if and when sports activities can begin during phase 3 and phase 4, depending on the risk level. So the WIA, the governing association for sports, high school athletics in our state, as well as middle school, has identified sports based on a level of risk. And so we're waiting for additional guidance that is scheduled to be released on July 22nd. So as we wrap up kind of this general overview of our planning and sharing some specifics, we know this is a really challenging time, and none of these options are good options. We are eager and hopeful to be back to our typical school experience as quickly as we can be. We know that our schools, they orbit around relationships and connection and community. Our schools are a hub of our neighborhoods, and not being able to open our schools and have students attend as they normally would is a really challenging thing, and there's a grieving part of that. that we are all going through during this time. Our focus right now is to make sure that safety is the utmost important, to be thinking about how we can maximize learning for students during this time, and ensuring that we're there for our families and our kids, and we're supporting their social emotional needs as we move through the turbulence that is moving through our entire community, and knowing that we don't know when the end will come to fruition for this pandemic. So with that said, we are now going to shift, and Heather is going to moderate some questions from you, and we'll be taking those as a panel. So Heather.
Oh, okay, thanks. So just a reminder that there is the question and answer function at the bottom of your screen. And if you just submit those, we're going through them and going to get to as many as we can. So Dr. Swinyard, question 1, I think it's the one on everybody's mind. What do you think the likelihood of school starting on time and in person is?
Well, as with this situation throughout, things are very fluid. And what we anticipated things were looking like 2 or 3 weeks ago has evolved pretty significantly. So we're monitoring the conversation very closely at the local level with Dr. Lutz, at the state level with the governor's office and OSPI, to solicit their guidance as they continue to look at the science of this situation and determine when it's safe to open our buildings. We're hopeful that we can open on time, but I think we all recognize that with the rise in cases, that whether or not our schools open on time has to really be carefully looked at and considered. So we're hoping that we will know more soon, but we recognize that this is really fluid, and we're all going to have to continue to be patient. And I know that's not the answer that we all hope for. We'd like to know what the certainty is going to be, but that doesn't exist right now in this COVID pandemic, and we need to be really thoughtful. Our children are our most precious items of our community. They're our most precious possessions, and we have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep them safe.
This question is for Becky Ramsey. It's kind of a two-parter. There is, how will the options here impact students' IEPs? And what if my student hasn't been identified yet? What will the evaluation process look like?
So first part, how will the options impact students with IEPs?
Yes.
Yeah. So when we land on an option, that's when we have those meetings with families to really talk through what kinds of services are available. Our goal is going to be that if it's safe to do so, to have students in the building as much as possible for students who have IEPs. A lot of this rests, like Dr. Swinyard said, on our local health officials and where we are with the safety guidelines as to how much in-person services we can provide. The second part of that, the mask, OSPI.
It wasn't the mask, it was what if they weren't, like what if they want to be evaluated? So they haven't yet, and they're looking to get services.
Yeah, our school psychologists are still following all evaluation timelines, so that when school starts back again, whether we are remote or we are in person, our school psychologists will still be doing evaluations.
Okay, this question kind of goes to Becky Dowdy and to Dr. Swinyard. How will parents be notified if someone is COVID positive, and what are the impacts to the school setting?
So I can speak to the first part of that. So that is something that we will work very closely with Spokane Regional Health on. They will provide us with guidelines for how we communicate out with families and what the next steps will be. So just like with the mumps outbreak, we will take all of our guidance from the local health department to deal with that.
And that's something that we are, in process and working with Dr. Lutz around, is what is the very clear protocol that will be followed if a student is identified as having contracted COVID, and what's the protocol for making sure that the classroom is safe, that it's clean, that the appropriate communication has taken place for others that may have had exposure.
Okay, the questions are definitely rolling in. How about Dr. Harris? Are there any special considerations that we're offering for students in foster care?
One thing in particular, students in foster care has the exact same rights as every other student. So that's something that we'll definitely start with. And so as we begin to start looking at special consideration, I should back up and say, and additionally, something that we attempt to do is through our office, family community engagement, as well as other offices, really be intentional about trying to be receptive to hear what's going on and working with the various organizations that may be connected with the child. And so in the event upon us starting up and we notice there are additional barriers that, particular students are facing in foster care arena, they have the ability to reach out to myself as the foster care liaison, as well as others, so we can hopefully help to kind of try to navigate them. I hope I'm answering the question in particular. So.
We'll see if there's a follow-up.
Okay.
Okay. So there's been several questions in the chat asking if families make a decision today, are they kind of held to it? So it's in several iterations. So is there the option for things to be fluid, for me to say I want to go distance today, and then once I see things are better in a week? So that it's kind of, there's a lot of different ways people are asking that question, but that's definitely a very popular question.
Yeah, so as we finalize our reopening plan, we will have an opportunity for families to register for our full distance learning option. And when that registration process is complete, we'll look at how many kids have registered for that full distance learning option, and then we'll evaluate how we've staffed our elementary schools. So if we have 60 kids that want the full distance learning option from Balboa Elementary, then we reevaluate how to staff Balboa based on those kids that will no longer attend in person, but they'll attend that full distance learning option. Once we've done that staffing, then parents would potentially have the option to switch their student back based on space available. And so that's part of our modeling, is knowing that if we staff our classrooms too tightly, then it really takes away any opportunity for there to be movement back and forth. So there's opportunities for some movement, but that would be one of the considerations families would have to think through if they decide on the full distance learning option, that they getting back into their neighborhood school might not be an opportunity during this school year. It would be based on space available. So that will be one of those really difficult considerations that families would have to think through.
Thank you. Phil, there are questions just asking, how are we going to ensure the cleanliness of our buildings, particularly in secondary where we know groups of kids could be moving? So they're kind of asking, what is the process and protocol for cleaning between classes?
Good question. So we're going to have cleaning caddies in every classroom, which is equipped with disinfectants and towels. We're going to encourage that those desks be wiped down every other class period. We're also going to be rotating the students in the classroom, since the secondary schools will be at half occupancy. We'll have extra seats in the room, and those will be identified so that every other class can sit in different seats. That will help us to spread out that disinfectant burden a little bit, and also we'll be recruiting sources from within the classroom. I think teachers are going to have a role in this as well, in making sure these spaces are kept as clean as possible.
Thank you. Becky Ramsey, for a child with an individual aide, how do you address 6-foot social distancing?
Yes, so there are some students that 6-foot social distancing is just not going to be feasible. For example, a student who is visually impaired is going to need an adult to help them out. And so we have been working with both Becky Dowdy and Phil Wright's team around what is the necessary PPE, protective personal equipment, that our staff would need and possibly a child would need in order for everyone to feel safe with the close physical contact. That we know we have some kids that they're going to need an adult close to them. Another example would be preschool age students. They fall down, they get hurt, somebody's going to have to help them. So it's one of the many questions that we're continuing to work on, but we know we're going to have to work to meet students' needs and keep staff and students safe too at the same time.
So this one is for Becky Dowdy, and I'm kind of consolidating a few people's questions, just that there's some common themes. So there's references to students having kind of chronic conditions, so either be it asthma or diabetes or other things, and they want to know if they'll be sent home every time there's a flare-up or a concern because of the kind of the heightened awareness that we're living in with the current pandemic.
So no, the school nurses know their kids very well, especially our students with chronic health conditions. And so we will be specifically looking for symptoms that would suggest that it was a communicable disease like COVID. So a cough, kind of a chronic cough with asthma, that's not going to trigger concern, and we're not going to send the student directly home. What we might do is communicate directly with those parents if we have a concern. And so open lines of communication are going to be very important for the nurses this fall as we work with families who have health concerns.
Thanks. Questions, again, I'm going to package these together, Adam. It's, are we considering altering the school year calendar, and who decides school opening, what phase we're in? Those type of questions are out there.
So the governor issued an order to close schools originally, and we continue to look to these local and state health officials and government officials on the status of our school buildings. In terms of the school year calendar, our school year calendar is developed as part of our collective bargaining agreement that we develop with the Spokane Education Association. So as part of our development of an MOU that we're currently in conversations with our education partners, it would be what the potential calendar would look like, and if there would be any adjustments to what the year looks like in terms of a start date or when breaks are. Those are all things that are collectively bargained and that would have to be discussed and agreed upon with our local association.
So Phil, questions around transportation and what the cleaning process and what that looks like for a student. Like, how are we keeping kids safe on the bus?
Well, I know that Sally Joe, our Director of Transportation, is looking into different types of cleaning methods, electrostatic type applicators and whatnot, and I think they are prepared to do wipings of the buses too in between trips. So I think that covers most of what their plans are currently, but I know they're continuing to watch the OSPI recommendations. We'll adjust accordingly if those guidelines change.
And transportation is specifically addressed in OSPI's guidelines that they distributed earlier during the pandemic. And we're evaluating those guidelines and, as Phil mentioned, preparing to implement them when our students are in need of transportation again, when our school buildings open. And so there isn't the same 6-foot distancing requirement that is outlined in the guidelines. So we continue to evaluate what that looks like and how to do that safely for our students.
Okay, there are quite a few questions coming in around some of our option programs. So Montessori, Libby, IST, and what the impacts of schools that have kids that cross elementary and secondary. What will that look like for them?
So our option schools historically build their year and build their programming in a way that is very unique to them. And so we'll be coming alongside and partnering with those schools to support them as they develop a plan that's really specific to them, but also meets the guidelines that are set forth for safety. So those plans will be developed as we identify the overall plan for our neighborhood schools. Then our option programmings will be involved in that, and then identifying what adjustments they need to make for their specific students.
Becky Dowdy, how will contact tracing occur in the school setting?
So again, it will be a partnership with the health department. So they're doing the actual contact tracing, but we will assist them with that. So if we have a staff member or a student who we suspect may be infected, we would communicate directly with the health department, both to keep other students and staff safe and also to support the family as they move through that process.
Oscar, is there a way to volunteer or to help with the start of the school year?
Yes, one thing that we do on our website, if you go and look under a specific task that has to do with kind of getting involved in the school, there's a process in terms of how you can sign up as a volunteer. We're currently really surveying what the needs are and what the interests are going to be for the district. I mean, as far as different things, as far as looking at opening up. So as far as having some solid, tangible options right now, we don't have it. However, we do encourage you to sign up, go to our website and sign up, and we'll have someone who will communicate with you about the volunteer opportunities as they do come up.
Okay. So I see several questions out in the audience asking it. It's particularly aimed at elementary. It's around PE, music, art, like what's going to be involved with next school year. And I can just kind of add to that piece that our hope is to have all of the offerings that your kids have had in every other year offered in the coming school year. We value those experiences. We value the skills and gifts those teachers bring. And our intent is to build a model that includes those. So we agree. We also are warning parents to make sure their kids bring coats and jackets because we want to go outside as much as possible.
And I would just add to that you know, we recognize, I have my own children that are going to school right now that are in elementary school, and you're only a fourth grader once. You only get that first day of fourth grade once. You only get that third grade experience once. And there's some grieving involved for our kids and for us as parents, that our kids aren't getting the experience that they would have typically received. And so we're going to do everything we can to make it the best year possible for them. And when our school buildings open, we are committed to doing everything we can to continue to provide that holistic experience for our students, to have the art experience, to have the music experience, to have the health and fitness experience. We have to recognize that it's going to look different. It's not what we are accustomed to. I know that Dr. Lutz today was sharing with us some ideas and strategies for how musical instruments could potentially have covers on them to increase the safety of a student playing that particular instrument in a small group setting with social distancing. So we're still modeling out what those experiences look like, but we have amazing teachers that are so committed and so passionate about their content area. And we have a team of music teachers that are committed and passionate to figuring out what it's going to look like. And a team of health and fitness teachers that are committed and passionate to figuring out what it's going to look like. There's lots of ideas around the world and country right now. So there's lots of new ideas and innovation taking place, and we're committed to tapping into that. So our hope is to continue to provide that well-rounded experience for kids, with the understanding that it won't be what we're used to, but we're going to do everything we can to make it great for kids.
Okay, there are questions around masks. So are they mandatory for all kids, kindergarten and up? And how will that be enforced? Kind of, there's a lot of parts. And then how would you help keep kids away from each other? So all of those kind of into that safety, social distancing protocols.
So masks will be required for students. There are some special circumstances outlined in the guidelines, but in general, kids will be required to wear masks to school. And we know that there are a variety of different opinions about that. We have a number of routines and procedures that we teach kids every year, grades K through 12, around safety. We don't let them climb on the bleachers. We don't let them run in the hall. there's a number of things that we have to teach and reinforce those expectations around. And this will be another layer to that. This will be another safety procedure, another safety routine that we have to teach to our kids. And when students are struggling with that, we'll follow up in the same type of way, working with them, working with the family, making sure that we build that relationship, understanding that student's individual needs, and doing everything that we can to make sure that they follow the safety guidelines that have been established for their school, just like that has always been the case. So will it be a challenging safety protocol to put into place? Absolutely. These are little people, and we got big kids, and sometimes they want to do things their own way, and we have to come alongside them and partner and impress upon them the importance of following those guidelines and the expectation that they do it, and have a really clear expectation and hold to that expectation. Little people, keeping them away from each other, that's going to be a challenge. You talk to our kindergarten teachers, they're amazing. If you ever want to see a space in this world that is just so thoughtfully choreographed with routines and procedures, visit one of our kindergarten classrooms in January. It's pretty amazing what our kindergarten teachers are able to help establish with our students. And it will be an ongoing conversation and a day by day and sometimes moment by moment reminders about why we need them to social distance and the importance of that. So it will certainly be a challenge. There's no question about that. And it's something that we will have to really be thoughtful about, and we'll have to lean on our success in teaching other routines and safety protocols, and we'll be doing the best that we can.
Okay, Phil, there's some questions out there about the types of chemicals being used to address COVID and if families would be allowed to bring their own. So their own hand sanitizer or their own wipes or their own supplies.
Hand sanitizers are being used in the buildings. We're providing that to the kids. I don't know that we've discussed parents or children bringing their own product, but if it was of the same products that we're using and allowing the classrooms, we would probably be okay with that. As far as disinfectants, we do have an array of disinfectants which we have ready for use. Most of them are peroxide based and quite green, and they tend to not to cause problems for people with sensitivities. So we use the greenest products that we have available to us. We're also going to have alcohol-based cleaners as well that provide a little bit stronger disinfection and have a lower dwell time and tend to disinfect a little bit more quickly. So we'll be using those products as well. But we will have hand sanitizers within the schools. There'll be at least 6 stations which are set up for use, and we intend to keep those supplies. Fortunately, we were able to tap into some supplies this past spring that we feel are going to be a reliable source through the school year. So that may not be necessary for students to be bringing their own product.
Okay, Adam, this question has to do with technology, and it kind of intersects, Oscar, with your work as well. So it talks about how are we going to help manage the digital divide in our population, and what type of supports are we going to be able to offer to families? And see, it's a 3-parter. Are there opportunities to partner with the community to support families and students? So I'll kind of let each of you, Adam, maybe take the first part and Oscar the last.
Yeah, so we're really fortunate in our district. We had been in the process of implementing a 1-to-1 student device ratio in grades 4 through 12 and a 2 computers to 1 student ratio in grades K through 3. So we had just been coming to a conclusion of that rollout in our district and have been really successful in professional development with teachers, building up a number of different digital tools and putting some infrastructure in place, such as our single sign-on platform that's called Clever, where students sign on to one place, and then all of our digital tools and curriculums are on one screen in one place for students. So as we moved into the pandemic, we were well positioned in terms of the devices that we had available to students and the resources and curriculum that are available. One of the things that we learned and heard really clearly from families is that there were too many different options. our strategy prior to the closure was to provide a really broad-based menu of curriculum and tools and platforms for our teachers to choose from, and to really encourage innovation and autonomy amongst our individual schools. And as we've moved through and received that feedback, we are working really hard to identify which tools we will use as a district so that there is consistency across grade levels and content areas. So for example, next year, regardless of the environment that we're in, we'll use Microsoft Teams for our live meetings so that there's one consistent place. No matter what grade level you're in, you'll use Microsoft Teams for those live meeting experiences. As compared to this spring, where we had maybe the elementary student was using Zoom, the middle school student was using Microsoft Teams, the high school student was using Blackboard Collaborate. There was lots of different options out there. And so that's part of the task force process that we conducted, is to identify which tools should we identify so that there's consistency for our families and for our kids. We implemented a laptop by checkout program over the spring, and we checked out around 8,000 laptops to our families to really support that digital divide. As we move forward into next year, we are going to be implementing a 1-to-1 device ratio for all students K-12. We're doing that for a couple of reasons. One is we think it best positions us for 21st century learning in both the short term and the long term, that kids have their own device that they can integrate within their learning experience, and the teacher can integrate within their instruction to provide that virtual space to collaborate, to connect with resources, to develop products, to work together as a team that's going to well position them for their post-secondary experience, whether that is a higher ed experience or the workforce. It's also really relevant in the current pandemic in that if our school buildings are open, students can't be sharing devices. And so a 2-to-1 device ratio, that doesn't work in a COVID environment because we can't have the sharing of that equipment. So having every student issued a laptop will ensure that we're not passing around and sharing. It also will enable us that if our school buildings are closed, that all of our students have a district-issued laptop to use, so that we make sure that it's functional and that it will run well with the different tools and curriculum that we want our students to be able to access. One of the challenges that we continue to face, and it's ongoing, and it's a community challenge, is access to quality high-speed internet. And we had very few families ask for assistance, although Oscar and his team worked very closely with our technology department to address families that were having trouble with internet access. We didn't receive as many requests as we had anticipated. What we did learn, though, is that many students did not have the quality of internet access that they needed for live meetings and other types of distance learning experiences. And so that continues to be a conversation both at the local and state level, is how can we support and enhance access to high-speed internet across our community. Having the device isn't enough. We need to make sure that we're supporting our families so that they can have that quality access. So we think we're well positioned to move forward, and we're working on how to streamline the experience for kids.
Yes, and as it relates to volunteerism and different things that's happening in the district, first of all, I'll say that we're so appreciative of our community of Spokane that is really rallied around us as a school district. I can say from the time that we had to close, we was excited and a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of help and support and the organizing that was taking place and different people who was just showing up saying we want to support. And we want to encourage that. And we're actually even looking to hone our volunteer process to try to give families as well as community members extra opportunities to try to support during this time. And uniquely to some things that Dr. Swinyer even shared, we're also trying to be very responsive to the needs, especially when it comes down to certain families who may not be, in a position to be served, whether it's internet access or even had access to laptops. One example in particular, through partnering with the community and various individuals, we discovered that, there was an individual, a child at an elementary school that had to move due to what happened in the COVID and being in the foster care system. And we was able to actually communicate across departments and et cetera, and actually work to get them the technology that they needed, even though they wasn't local. And that kind of speaks to, I think, the power of having, partnerships with the community and et cetera. So I'll say going forward, we're talking about it, and we want you to keep not just asking, but keep showing up. And please never take our response as something that's pushing you off, because that's never our intent, because we need you. And as a matter of fact, we've got to have you during this time, especially as we begin to start looking at the new models around education and et cetera. So as far as the opportunities, I'll say that, some are yet coming up. There's a group that I'm working with even right now that actually has like a micro enterprise business going around making masks that they're going to be trying to present to families and give them to families to support them and et cetera. So those things are happening. And there's community organizations that are talking about, doing drives to kind of collect school supplies. When with school supplies, the list is going to look totally different, as you know, from going forward than they have in the past, given where we're in right now. So I think the more that you reach out to us, as well as I want to encourage that as we begin to start even looking at community organizations that are doing amazing work out there to support families before school start, those can be some great places to kind of partner with as well. So.
Thank you. Becky Ramsey, there's some questions out there from families looking for support in making their decision. So if a case manager, they're wanting to know if and when case managers might reach out to kind of work with families on choosing the best option for their students, given either their medical condition or their IEP.
Our case managers, they return to work later in August. But I encourage families, you can always reach out to me and I can connect you with either myself or one of our other special ed administrators who can work with you right now while our teachers are on their summer break. So I can always be reached by email at beckyr@spokaneschools.org, and I'll get you connected to the right person.
Thanks. So Adam, there's a question: if a secondary family is trying to consider between face-to-face and online, will they have the same course offerings in the online environment that they would in the physical environment?
Yes, the course offerings will be very comparable at the secondary level. We have historically had a really robust offering of online courses for students through our Spokane Virtual Learning Academy. In fact, we have many school districts across the state contract with us to use our platform and our curriculum because of its high quality and because of the number of offerings that we have. In fact, some of our local school districts have reached out to us over the last month and have asked to partner with us. So the offerings will be consistent. They won't be identical. One of the things that we recognize is there are certain types of experiences that are extremely difficult to replicate in a distance learning environment. And our career and technical education courses is a good example of that. Those hands-on experiences, that hands-on teamwork and collaboration that is integrated into those spaces in our schools, it is really difficult to replicate in that distance learning environment. So they'll be comparable, but they won't be identical, and there'll be some areas that are stronger than others, and CTE is an example where it's difficult for us to provide that same type of experience.
So there are several questions about childcare and Express, and if the district is looking at other options to support families, particularly healthcare workers and others. So it's I'm just kind of picking through the threads. So between Express and childcare for younger students, should they need it, and particularly we're going to prioritize healthcare workers, students.
So we're working through that, and Oscar was really heavily involved and can share a little bit about what we did this spring to support our first responders and healthcare workers. And we really took to heart the guidance we received from the governor and to try to support those families. Childcare is a significant issue as we think about what model we'll utilize when we come back into our schools. And we're evaluating what role our Express programming will play in that and how to do that safely. And we're also hearing from many community partners that have reached out and have said they want to help, and that if we have a rotating schedule for our secondary students and some of our elementary grades, that they want to support providing a safe place for students to go during their virtual day if their parent is working. So we recognize that childcare is a significant challenge for some of the models that we're discussing. And we're committed to working really hard and partnering with the community to provide as many different options as possible to our families.
Phil, this one has your name all over it. How is the air circulated in our buildings? Is it recirculated within the building itself, or is there a fresh air delivery to each classroom?
Actually, this spring we changed the control settings of our building, so we are increasing the air exchange, so they are getting more fresh air than they did in the past. We're still trying to meet our energy goals as well, but we have made dramatic changes to the systems to improve the airflow and keep as much fresh air in the building as possible.
Becky Dowdy, there's questions about if my student comes to school and they have a fever, what's that going to look like?
So in terms of screening,
Well, yeah, I'll let you. It just says my child comes to school, turns out they have a temperature. What happens?
so just like what would happen under normal circumstances, if we found out a kiddo had a fever, we would be contacting the parent and asking them to come pick up their child.
So then there are questions trying to ask how, and I know you addressed it in some of the earlier responses, Adam, but maybe more direct around how is distance learning going to be different than what families experienced this spring?
So part of our planning, as we've discussed, is reevaluating our full distance learning experience if our school buildings are closed. And so we're in the process of doing that. And specifically, one good example is having consistent digital tools, as I referenced, that kids aren't having to manage multiple platforms and multiple tools across different teachers and grade levels. So that's one example. We're also having discussions around what the schedule for the day is and what is the expected amount of time students will participate in activities. OSPI set really clear guidelines in the spring for how many hours a day students were expected to participate, and we adhered to those expectations. And that's what we're reevaluating now, is how much time should kids be spending if they're in that full distance learning environment. What aspects of that are in real time with the teacher, what aspects are happening with the student on an individual basis on their own. And so we're working through what that schedule will look like. So in general, what you can expect is that there's going to be enhanced consistency, and that the expectations and what we're asking students to do and the structure for that and the consistency of that is going to increase. Those are conversations that are part of our partnership with the Spokane Education Association and will be part of the plan that we are required to submit to OSPI.
There are a series of questions kind of again connected. So it's saying, if I choose distance learning and I'm a Montessori or an Apple family, or I'm a Franklin family or LC, do I get my spot back next year in my special program or at my home school?
Yeah, so our goal is to keep our school district united and together to the greatest extent possible. And we're going to be doing the best we can to staff our buildings so that students aren't adversely impacted by the decisions they make because of the COVID crisis. So we'll be working really hard to provide opportunities to make sure that if students decide they're not comfortable coming back into our schools, that they have the opportunity to come back to a neighborhood school or an option school. Again, there's some of the realities of space available and how we staff, but we'll be doing everything we can to make sure that we can welcome those students back and get them to the experience that they think is going to be a best fit for them.
There are questions about, will parents be able to visit schools? So like, if I have a kindergartner, can I bring her on the first day? And also, is there a way for parents to get a preview or a sneak peek kind of as to what school and the setup looks like so that they can help prepare their student for what to expect?
Becky, do you want to talk about visitors, and then I can chat about what a sneak peek might look like?
So I think, and Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the guidance at this point in time is this: we're not going to have outside people into the buildings, just trying to reduce exposure as much as possible. So, but everything is changing, and it might change before school starts. So, but that's kind of where we're standing right now.
Yeah, well, and we know, again, these are things we grieve, right? Because I know how much I just absolutely love visiting my child's classroom and seeing them and seeing their teacher and seeing their friends. And that is just such an important part of the community that we create in our schools. And so this is definitely another area of grieving, but for the safety of kids, when our buildings open, we will be looking to limit the number of different individuals that were coming in. In terms of getting a sense of what it's going to look like, when we complete our planning process with the Spokane Education Association and we prepare to submit our plan to OSPI, we'll have a document that's created that lays out all the details of what the models look like, what are the guidelines, what are the protocols, really one singular place that families and staff can go to read all the information and all the details about what things are going to look like moving forward. And we'll be providing some snapshots of what these classrooms would potentially look like. And again, some of the work that we've done, we're having to take out a lot of furniture, and there's not a lot of space left in the classroom other than desks. And we know that that is difficult to see because it doesn't feel or look like what we're accustomed to. But we know that with some thoughtful planning, we can continue to provide kids a valuable experience, knowing the importance of that in-person instruction. Again, there's a lot of that think outside the box, think differently, knowing that we're going to have to be outside more when the weather's nice, learning outside, teaching outside, talking, going for walks, making sure kids can get up and move in ways that can continue the learning, knowing that the ability to do that in the classroom will be limited in a way that we've not experienced before. So sneak peek will be available, those details will be available so families can get a sense of what the experience is going to be.
So 2 things to address maybe in the amount of time that we have left. There's lots of questions about full distance learning, and I just wanted to point out to the audience that we'll be hosting a webinar specifically dealing with that in the end of July. I can't remember the date, Rochelle, but I know it's the last Thursday in July will be specifically dedicated to that topic. And then there's just questions about if we are on a rotating schedule and I've got students in multiple locations, how are you going to support family kind of continuity? So we have people that have kids at all levels. We have kids that have parents that have kids at 2 high schools. So how will we make it consistent and doable for families?
So if we're on a rotating, alternating schedule, which the likelihood that will be the case at our secondary level when our school buildings open, that's likely based on our conversations and the considerations we're taking into account, and that it's likely that some of our upper elementary grades could be participating in that same type of model. One of the things that we will work to do is to choreograph that so siblings are on the same rotating schedule. So if you have an A group and a B group, that siblings are all on the A group regardless of school or grade level. So we'll work to do that choreographing. It'll take a lot of planning. We're a large school district. We have over 30,000 students. And so there's a lot of moving pieces for us to have to think through and how we staff and make sure that all those things run together and are smooth. But that's our interest, is to have families on the same rotating schedule. That will be one of those first considerations as we decide who's in the A group and who's in the B group as schools begin modeling that out when our plan's finalized.
I think if there's time for one more question, it's a good one to end with. It's just, how can parents help prepare their kids for the fall? So regardless of the model that they're choosing as a family or where the state and the district and the health conditions are, what can families do to help?
I think every kid is going to respond to this a little bit differently. You know, when our school buildings closed and I came home and I told my two children that are school aged, my daughter cried and was really upset, and my son responded he was okay. And as we moved through the spring, one of my students did really well, and one of them really struggled, and it was really hard as a family. And we have 2 educators in our house, and it was still a challenge. So it's really important for there to be just ongoing communication with your student and talking with them about what's going on in an age appropriate and developmentally appropriate way, talking with them, asking how they're feeling, and talking about the unknown, and that the unknown is scary, and it's okay to worry about the unknown, and that we all have a sense of worry about what we don't know about what the future holds. And so I think particularly during this time as we're planning, having those conversations with them, talking through that there are lots of adults in our community that deeply care about kids and are working really hard to provide them the best experience that we can possible. So having that really open and regular conversation, asking them how they're feeling, connecting with them, and talking through the different scenarios of what it might look like. Every parent's got to make that decision on how detailed you're going to get with that. You got to know your kid, and you're the one that knows them best to make that decision. But to talk to them about it now. What we don't recommend is putting it off and not mentioning it until the middle of August or the 3rd or 4th week of August, right before things are scheduled to start up again. But to begin that conversation now, and really to encourage that open line of communication, even if it's just checking in on them. You don't have to talk about school every day during the summer, certainly, but even just to regularly be checking on them and, you know, hey, how are you feeling today? Stay a good day. And is there anything on your mind today? Those are all really good questions just to regularly probe our kids to get a sense of what they're thinking about and what things that they're focused on. So, and that's a conversation that's important no matter whether your student's a kindergartner or a senior. As they get older, they like to pretend that they don't need you anymore, and they need you now more than ever.
I think that takes our time. And so just to the audience, we will be hosting another on next Thursday and the subsequent Thursday with the webinar on full distance learning on the 30th. I know that there literally was hundreds of questions and we didn't get to them all. I imagine that we'll be typing up something towards the end and addressing the major questions in a message out to families.
So we really appreciate you taking your time. Again, we apologize if the question you were hoping to get addressed didn't get addressed this evening, but our plan is to continue these webinars throughout the summer on a regular basis. Next week's webinar will cover the same general overview at the beginning, and we'll dive right back in to the question and answer portion of these webinars. And you're always welcome to email any one of us if you have a question that you would like answered sooner than our next webinar. And we will start sending out regular parent communication through email as we move through the summer. So we appreciate your time. We hope that you are enjoying the summer in the best way that you can. And we hope that you are well in the days to come. Thanks, everyone.